Resident Evil, one of the most popular horror franchises in gaming. I didn't get into Resident Evil till Resident Evil 7 came out, so I was pretty late to the party, but since then I've become an avid fan of the franchise. So today I'm taking a look at each entry in the franchise and giving some honest thoughts and feelings I have about them. Now while I was playing these games, I was specifically keeping in mind these aspects of them that I think are core parts in what makes each entry either good or bad. I think scariness being horror games, level designs being semi-open world puzzles, and boss fights are integral things that stand out to people when playing them. Each scale will range from 1 to 5, and I'll be using herbs to measure these things. Red being 1 and 5 being purple, which, yes, there's purple herbs that only appeared in the Resident Evil guide and spin-off. Now by the end of the video, I'm gonna be also ranking which are the best and worst installments. Disclaimer, Resident Evil has had a lot of entries not only in its main timeline but also spin-offs. I'm only gonna be taking a look at the main entries to the franchise, seeing as how I don't want the video being too long and some of the spin-offs are hard to get a copy of. I'll also be specifically talking about the remaster or remake versions of the games if available, seeing as how it's best foot forward. Starting off, we have Resident Evil 0. RE0 released in 2002 for the GameCube. Between the years of 2002 to 2019, the game was ported to Wii and remastered for most consoles. RE0 was a prequel to Resident Evil following the story of the characters who arrived at the mansion before Chris, Jill, and Wesker. The game was received great by critics, with the majority saying it was an 8 or 9 out of 10. One of the most interesting things this game did was incorporate a partner system. So instead of choosing boy or girl to play the game, you can switch between characters as you play, with the other being AI or control them both simultaneously. Something I think was unnecessary with this buddy system was making Rebecca and Billy have to be different in terms of gameplay, since all they really did was make Rebecca feel useless outside of just mixing herbs. She takes more damage and can't move heavy objects like Billy can. I honestly found RE0 pretty boring overall between the level designs, puzzles, and enemies you encounter. It just felt very uncreative as a final project for me. For scariness, I didn't find myself spooked or given goosebumps, so it's getting a red herb. For level design, the game had some interesting areas like the train for example, but overall I wasn't a fan of it, so it's going to be another red herb. For boss fights, I didn't find any of the bosses have anything unique about their appearance or gameplay, so it's another red herb for me honestly. Moving on to the one that started it all, we have Resident Evil. It was released in 1996 for PlayStation, Sega Saturn, the DS, and PC. Between 2008 to 2019, the game was ported to the Wii and remastered for most consoles. Now I am not a fan of this game. I know everyone hails this game as like one of the greatest entries in the franchise and that it was revolutionary in 1996 for the horror genre, but it aged like cheese. The remaster significantly looks better visually and it definitely makes the game more palpable, but the biggest problem with this game is its fixed camera angles. I know everyone makes the argument that the fixed camera angles actually make the game scarier, but it just makes it hard to play. There's nothing quite like watching yourself as if you're a fly on the ceiling, a zombie slowly walking towards you from the other end of the hall, and you miss all 10 shots and die, or being violently molested by zombie dogs bombarding you in a hallway with the same POV. The game's really challenging even on the easiest difficulty setting. But setting aside the obvious shit thing about this game, the rest of the game is pretty good. The game features these eerie short cutscenes you encounter throughout when discovering new areas or encountering new enemies. This was the same game to give us one of the most iconic video game villains, Albert Wesker. Honestly, a huge and great plot twist for the story. Bro was playing everyone before even the start. This game really did make the horror genre popular for video games and was ambitious in what it was doing at the time. While I can't say this is a personal favorite of mine in the franchise, there's definitely things to be admired and appreciated about it. As for the scariness of the game, it really didn't scare me any, not even a cheap jump scare to be had for me. There's definitely some eeriness to this game, so I'm willing to give it a yellow herb for scariness. For the level design, the game featured various areas that felt unique while cohesive with each other, with puzzles that felt interesting. The level design worked to flow the story and definitely made a hard shift once you find out why there's zombies with a secret lab beneath the mansion. The game easily earns itself a green herb for its level design. Last thing to touch on is the game's boss fights. This game had some really creepy boss fights, albeit not the most creative in design or mechanics. Some of the boss fights can be really challenging between their huge size or speed in a confined area. I'm willing to give it a yellow herb for its boss fights. 2 years later, we got Resident Evil 2. It was available on most consoles at the time, including thegame.com, which I never heard of before for probably good reason. The game also received a remake in 2019 for most platforms, including mobile. Now this game is fascinating in itself, and here's why. For starters, the game featured 2 brand new protagonists, Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield, sister to Chris Redfield from the first game. This game could be played 4 different ways. Yep, that's right, 4 different ways, which completely changes the story of the game. They broke each character up into part A and B. Depending on which order you play the characters in, it changes the events of the game. If you wanted to, you could even play both parts as the same character, though it doesn't exactly make the most sense story-wise. Ideally though, the canon way of playing the game is Claire A and Leon B, as Capcom has suggested this is the canon way to play the game. But it's definitely innovative to have a game feel different 4 different ways, inciting players to actually play the same game at least 4 times just for its story. In 1998, this was a never heard of thing before and something we haven't seen a game do the same way. The game's story takes place shortly after the events of the first game, with Claire looking for her missing brother and Leon starting his new job at the city's police department. You learn pretty quickly the virus spread to the city from the mansion, and the city has had a huge outbreak, so everything's gone to shit. This game is arguably my favorite title in the franchise. Without glazing this game for over an hour, I'll summarize. This game is incredibly iconic for its mechanics we'd see later in the franchise, characters that we definitely see a lot more of with one of the protagonists, and gameplay that's honestly just peak. Most of the game's level design is large while still feeling full of places to explore and puzzles to solve. It feels incredibly satisfying and rewarding in the game to find codes to safes and missing parts for things. I honestly felt like Sherlock Holmes when I was playing the game, unlocking safes and lockers with codes and finding parts to make things work properly. The rewards of gun upgrades and guns definitely made it feel worthwhile trekking across this huge police station being chased by this dude. One of the things I love about this game is that it introduced the mechanic of the undying chaser, as I call it, which in this game is Mr. X. Mr. X is a tyrant like what we saw in the first game's lab, only more finished. He's the only enemy in the game that chases you constantly and can't die to prior parts where he's supposed to, a mechanic we'd see in future titles such as Resident Evil 3, 7, and 8. Mr. X will legit just show up out of nowhere and relentlessly chase you till he beats your ass. I absolutely love Mr. X's design and how he feels like a Goliath that just breaks you like Bane from Batman. The amount of times I got jump scared and instantly felt my heart begin to race as I ran away from this dude, just silently fitting himself through a door I was about to enter. He doesn't make any sounds or any kind of dramatic noise, just simply walks into the room in instant fear. Or even around corners, like you'll be walking down a hallway and around the corner there he is to clothesline you. The fact that his footsteps are so heavy and you can hear them speed up as he thinks he knows where you are is crazy. But moving on from Mr. X, the game features not only returning enemies of regular zombies and zombie dogs, but new ones including the iconic Lickers, G-Adults, and Ivies, which are all equally as annoying for different reasons. Now, my least favorite part of this game is the sewers. The difficulty for this part of the game spikes for me whenever I play it. There's a map that tells you where everything is, but this part of the game comes with not only a lack of overall resources to find, but the level design itself is just annoying to have to navigate with tons of G-Adults spread around. But it's time to give this game the herbs it deserves. Honestly, the most heart-pounding thing you fear in this game is Mr. X, and the jump scares he can give you. The entourage of enemies aren't really terrifying, so for scariness, I'm giving this game a green herb. Level design is great in the game with a dip and likability for the sewer section, but overall I'd give it a blue herb. Now for boss fights, this game doesn't have much variety. All but one of the boss fights is the same guy, just different. It is until your final standoff with Birkin that he actually changes much in how he plays. Sure, you can argue that your second encounter with him is unique in its mechanics, but dropping him is an optional part of that fight and not a required mechanic. While the boss fights are enjoyable, mind you, some points definitely get dinged for lack of variety. So for boss fights, I'd give the game a green herb. We're now moving on to Resident Evil 3, or as it was originally called, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, after its main antagonist, Nemesis. It was released in 1999 with getting ports and eventually a remake in the following years between 2000 to 2020. Unlike its predecessor, you spend most of the game playing as Jill from the first game, with segments where you get to play as Carlos. The game's story takes place a little earlier than 2 but ends at the same time as 2, so the games for the most part overlap each other. Now this game is incredibly bland compared to the previous one. The game looks good, plays good, but it just feels mediocre and bland. It's not without reasons, so let's get into why that is. Starting off, this game was developed and released during the early times of the pandemic, which was a terrible time for video games. Honestly, ever since the world had to go through that, games and movies feel different than they used to, and not in a good way. Resident Evil 3 Remake was one of the first instances of the downfall of movies and games where big budget projects felt rushed and not filled in, or felt just incredibly uncreative. Something we're still seeing today with companies doubling down that it's people's fault for not liking things, as if we all just collectively forgot what good games and movies are. So release window for this game definitely played a factor in it being bland. Now the worst part about this game is Nemesis, and hear me out about this. He is so annoying to fucking deal with. Like, out of all the titles in the franchise, nothing is more rage baiting than this motherfucker. Like Mr. X, he's an unkillable stalker enemy that periodically pops up and chases you down, but unlike Mr. X, this motherfucker can swing around like he's Spider-Man and zoom to suddenly being in front of you like he's auditioning for an anime role. And he also eventually gets a fucking rocket launcher to shoot at you with. It's the most annoying ass shit we've gotten in this franchise in my opinion. Which sucks to say because the character is cool and he's definitely an icon for the franchise because his concept is a perfected tyrant essentially. The ultimate bioweapon designed by Umbrella. The thing they were striving for with the Tyrant project in 1 and Mr. X in 2. Plus how badass is it to hear Nemesis say, he's really cool, just fucking annoying. But moving on, the enemies in this game mostly are just zombies with not much diversity it feels. There's bugs, which are only in one segment of the game, and then there's this thing. Like, what even is this thing? Like, it's so left field, it feels like something out of another game. It looks like something out of one of the Fallout games. A very out of place enemy for just one segment of the game. There's also Hunter Gammas, but they're briefly in the game. Comparing it to the first game, there's a severe lack of puzzles in this game. Part of what made the first 2 games fun was exploring the areas, trying to find codes, and piece together where missing parts are for things. This game's level design just feels empty. I will give kudos to expanding on 2 with exploring more of the actual city, but it failed in my opinion to fill it with stuff that felt fun like its predecessor. The best part of this game is hands down the intro sequence. It cinematically was just great, and it was creative in its perspective change from Jill to Nemesis. For scariness, this game didn't really get my heart pounding in any way, and I definitely didn't feel unsettled by anything, so it's getting a red herb for scariness. For level design, the levels are interesting with being able to explore parts of the city, but most times feel empty with not many puzzles to do, so I'll give it a green herb for its level design. Now for its boss fights, it has the same issue RE2 did with it just being one guy over and over, but I will say this, each fight felt incredibly different. What makes Nemesis work better than Birkin is that Nemesis is physically way different every time you face him. So while there's a ding for boss fights, it definitely gets bonus points for making one dude feel very different every time you fight him. So for boss fights, it gets a blue herb. We're now on to Resident Evil Code Veronica. It was released in 2000 for most consoles hot at the time, and it also got a director's cut, Code Veronica X, in 2001, and it also got a remaster in 2011. The first and only time we see the Redfield siblings reunited side by side. We also see the return of Albert Wesker, but way cooler now thanks to the prototype virus, and basically has superpowers. This game honestly feels forgettable unless you grew up playing it. The main purpose this game served was bringing Wesker back into the picture and showcasing that he has powers because of the virus. I think having Wesker be a secondary antagonist in this game, with the mirroring objective to Chris and Claire's, is really interesting for the game's story. I can't say there's anything in the game that stands out gameplay wise, but for the game's scariness, I'm going to give it a red herb, because there wasn't anything in the game that really scared or unsettled me. For level design, the game felt pretty mediocre, but it at the least was easier on the eyes than the original Resident Evil, so I'll give it a yellow herb. For boss fights, I thought the bosses actually had some cool designs to them, and some of them were really unique. So for boss fights, I'm going to give it a green herb. We're now on to everyone's favorite Resident Evil 4. Released in 2005, it received ports, a remaster, and a remake from 2005 to 2023. We jump back into being Leon again, and arguably the most iconic look in the franchise, rocking that brown leather jacket. Resident Evil 4 made a major shift in terms of its theme from being typical modern / lab setting to old country. It paid off since it's the #1 game in the franchise everyone thinks of first when they think of Resident Evil. The game, unlike other titles, treated the virus as a cult rather than an outbreak or a lab experiment gone wrong. The game felt very large in its level design between exploring the village, the castle, and the island. The game's vibe makes a really hard turn come to the final act with the island, which I personally thought was like a major left turn compared to what majority of the game has felt like. And unlike Secret Labs in previous titles, which seemed like the logical final destination of the story, the island felt a little out of place given the first 2 acts of the game. But that's just my take on it, since I know this game is beloved by everyone who are fans of the franchise, and I'm a fan of it myself because it really is a top tier title in the franchise. The remake of the game was a massive hit with people, since everyone's first thought after RE2 was remade was, now let's get an RE4 remake. Personally, my favorite part of this game is when you're in the tunnels with Leon and face off against one of the Verdugo. I think this is arguably the coolest creature we've gotten in the franchise. It definitely has inspiration from the Xenomorph from the Alien franchise, but it's just really cool design-wise, and it's menacing in its speed and size. And we can't forget about the Regenerators. These things are honestly horrifying, and they're hard to kill. It's incredibly unique for these creatures to not only have an incredible healing factor, making them almost unkillable, but the need to use infrared vision to see the weak points within them. It's just an incredibly unique mechanic for an enemy. The way the creature even moves is amazing, not just for its design, but for its scary factor. When I first saw these things, I almost shit my pants, honestly. Like, the threat level for enemies takes a huge turn up when these guys start showing up. And they come in nightmare flavor too, like, the fuck? For the scariness, this game definitely has a bigger creep factor to it compared to previous titles, especially when it's nighttime in the game with enemies glowing red eyes. And the Regenerators definitely bring up the scary factor when they appear in the game. The castle segment of the game though definitely took a backseat for scariness factor, but overall I'd give this game a blue herb for scariness. For level design, this game had very wide open areas to explore, but it lacked the amount of puzzles we've seen in previous titles, so I think a green herb is fitting. As for the bosses, the game had a variety of boss fights that felt unique and different from one another, though they were mostly bug themed, which I thought got kinda old after a certain point, but overall it's another blue herb. Next is Resident Evil Revelations. Like its predecessor, Capcom was wanting to branch away from predictability and decided to take this title in the direction of being an episodic game. The game released in 2012 exclusively for the DS, with a remaster for most platforms in 2013 and ports in 2017. The game puts us back in the shoes of Jill, who's searching for Chris, who's been reported as MIA. The entirety of this game takes place on a ship, which means all the enemies are themed after the sea. The setting of being on a boat actually makes the game kind of jarring, since the corridors are narrow, and ship settings in horror games are always unsettling between the discomfort of metal walls and floors, grime usually scattered about, and a lack of visibility with dangers around corners. For scariness, there's definitely some creep factor in the setting of the ship and some of the enemies, so I'll give it a yellow herb for scariness. For level design, the setting of the ship I think worked really well and was enticing, so I'm giving it a green herb for level design as well. For boss battles, most enemies in this game, including the bosses, just look like clay blobs. There really wasn't much diversity it felt in the bosses, with no unique gameplay aspects to them, so I'm giving it a red herb for its boss fights. We're now on to Resident Evil 5, which is when the franchise really leaned hard into being an action shooter game to try and compete with the mass popularity of the Call of Duty games. It was released in 2009 and got ports from 2009 to 2019. This is the first game in the franchise to have multiplayer and followed Chris along with a new protagonist named Sheva Alomar. The game also saw the return of the antagonist Wesker as well, which I have a lot to say about, but I'll get through my other talking points I have here first about the game. The game's honestly fun gameplay wise, but while fun, the controls are definitely something different compared to the other titles in the franchise. It still kept its third-person camera perspective, but they were really trying to innovate with this game, which I think hurt it in the long run. The controls for this game feel like they were trying to squeeze too much into one thing without having a clear path on how to do it. The biggest complaint most people had with this game had to do with its control scheme, no matter what platform you were playing on. It's a letdown for those as well who were fans of the horror/puzzle mechanics of previous titles, because this game completely scrapped those being integral parts of focus when making the game. It's understandable why they wanted to make the shift to being just an action shooter given the time for gaming, and having the opportunity to do so, that wouldn't be completely bizarro for them to suddenly just do. Seeing as though the franchise half the time sported two main characters in its entries, it made sense to want to finally give multiplayer support for one of their main titles. I don't think multiplayer hurt the game, and it definitely got more people introduced to the franchise where there was opportunity to play with friends, especially with an online mode that supported up to 6 players at a time. The game didn't hit home runs with everything it was wanting to do for itself, but it definitely succeeded in its goal of trying to rope in as many new players as possible. But touching back to what I said earlier, this title brings Wesker back into the spotlight, being the game's main antagonist, and he is incredible. Wesker in Resident Evil 5 is the best thing to turn out from the franchise. He's not the most in-depth villain, but that's okay. There's this trend over the years where writers have felt the need to give their villains tragedy or some kind of intricate backstory in order to be a good villain to audiences. There's been some amazingly written villains in media over the years with this in mind, but Wesker is simply just an evil intended person with self-interest. Wesker makes it apparent that over the years he's essentially figured out how to turn other people into being like how he is after experimenting with virus strains made by Umbrella Corps, the same people he used to work for and were also responsible for making him, being a clone of its CEO. He was genetically modified so he could have superpowers after coming in contact with their engineered virus. Wesker believes in the philosophy that for the world to be better, it must first burn. Wesker plans on unleashing his perfected virus strain across the world using missile rockets. Everyone who doesn't die from the virus will evolve into being like Wesker, with him being their godlike ruler. The God complex really hit Wesker hard after finding out he's a clone of Umbrella's CEO. The idea of an army of Weskers is about as Avengers level threat as you can get. Wesker not only is incredibly strong thanks to the virus, but also insanely fast that it actually looks like he's teleporting. Picture thousands of that dude against what remnants remain of humanity. It's game over. The boss fight with Wesker is almost the most jaw-dropping shit the franchise has had. Like when I had my first encounter with this boss, my jaw just dropped because I could barely land any shots with how fast he is, dodging bullets with ease before rushing me down. His voice might be a little goofy, but he's an absolute menace of an enemy. The final encounter you have with Wesker at the end of the game is honestly disappointing since this is supposed to be Wesker's final form, yet he seemed deadlier when he had super speed. His final form should have definitely been something more monstrous than just being Hentai Man. The game's scariness is non-existent, with being way too action-packed to find anything truly scary or unsettling, so it's a red herb for scariness. The level design honestly feels incredibly bland. There wasn't any part of the game where I felt excited to be exploring the area I was in, and it felt empty outside of things to shoot, so that's another red herb. Now as for boss fights, this game featured the best boss fight in the series with Wesker. Both encounters with Wesker prior to the volcano were immaculate boss fights just in the fact of not knowing what to do as players. The rest of the game's bosses for the most part feel bland in comparison to Wesker's two fights, being mostly forgettable till I replayed this game for the video. So it's thanks to Wesker carrying this category that it gets a green herb at best. Next is Resident Evil Revelations 2. Despite being a direct sequel to Revelations 1 as the title states, it has no connection to the first one, like zero connection whatsoever in any way. It was released in 2015 with ports released in 2015 and 2017. Capcom stuck to their guns and made this title also episodic, but instead follows Claire, who we haven't seen in a hot minute in the franchise, and new protagonist Barry Burton, who was a side character in Resident Evil 1. The game's story has you flashing between past events with Claire and current events with Barry. Now this game hands down feels so much like a copy of Silent Hill. Like there's enemies in this game that look almost identical to Silent Hill enemies. The game's story is really boring, which could be forgiven if it wasn't for the major lack of creativity in this game's enemies. Like it's one thing to be bland in enemy designs like with RE0, but come on, this is the same dude, only one's clearly better in its originality. For scariness, the game does have creepy enemy designs, but some are just so unoriginal, so it's a yellow herb for scariness. For level design, the levels aren't bad, but for me personally just felt boring, so it's a yellow herb for level design. Now for the boss fights, they were pretty boring in both design and mechanics. But again, the final boss of this is legit the same thing they did in 4 with Mendez. Like it's the exact same idea, so it's a red herb for boss battles. But we now come to the most controversial title for fans, Resident Evil 6. It was released in 2012 with ports and a remaster between 2013 to 2019. This title was super ambitious in what it wanted to be. Capcom wanted this to be the crescendo of the franchise and bring everyone together, featuring 4 campaigns. Across the 4 campaigns, you play as classic and new protagonists as worlds collide to stop this new threat to the world. This game, like RE5, also featured co-op for every campaign. Now on paper, it sounds like an incredible idea to finally have everyone's worlds collide, but the execution is what was the game's problem. The writing and gameplay didn't hit with players or critics, bringing in the lowest reviews a title has gotten in the franchise. It's honestly the most disliked title based on reviews, which I think is a little harsh given Revelations 2. Honestly, it was great seeing Leon and Chris get to finally meet in this game. Chris's campaign is definitely the best one out of the 4, taking a very military war approach to the story. It also solidifies this theme in Chris's life that he just can't catch a break losing people. Piers, who is Chris's best friend in the story, becomes infected with the virus himself and gains superpowers, making for some really fun gameplay for his character. Leon's campaign is good as well, though just not as memorable as Chris's was. Ada's campaign is brief compared to the others and very mediocre, honestly. Speaking of Ada, it was extremely confusing having 2 Adas in this game because out of nowhere you just have Ada trying to kill Leon and causing racing amok, and then real Ada shows up. I think the Ada clone was unnecessary and pointless, honestly. Now, the most controversial campaign is Jake Bueller's, who is also the son of Albert Wesker. Jake Bueller's campaign is the main campaign in the game since he's a very crucial part to undoing this threat to the world. Unlike his dad though, he doesn't have superpowers, though his fighting style is very reminiscent of his father's. The character is very bland in my opinion, and most people didn't like this idea of like a long lost son of Wesker, which completely understandable because I did not care for it much either. Gameplay wise, this game is actually better than 5. Both the control scheme and the inventory system are just smoother and easier to work with. The dodge mechanic is definitely hilarious though, just going from standing perfectly still to flying through the air at hyper speed basically. The game doesn't have anything in it honestly scary or unsettling, so it's a red herb for scariness. Level design isn't great in this game with very narrow and straightforward level designs and no puzzles to have to solve, so it's another red herb for level design. For boss battles, the game had some uniquely designed bosses that I like, but majority of them just feel like a mess with their designs you can't make heads or tails of, so I'm gonna give it a yellow herb for boss battles. Now things get interesting with Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. It was released in 2017 with ports from 2018 to 2024. Capcom decided that in order to revive this franchise, they needed a brand new direction. They decided it was time to go back to what started Resident Evil. With wanting to lean into the horror genre of Resident Evil more, they decided to make their first-person Resident Evil game with new faceless protagonist Ethan Winters. The plot follows Ethan as he travels to Louisiana to find his estranged wife Mia, who suddenly disappeared out of his life after she contacted him to stay away. Clearly this dude's listening skills need improvement. Completely ignoring the video he received though, he explores the Baker's estate in search of her. This game was a home run for Capcom because it did everything they hoped it would for fans. This title is truly a scary game for the franchise, and the decision to make it first person was the perfect decision for that. Now the game isn't a 10 out of 10 since there's only 3 enemy variants that you come across in the game that all look the same just in different sizes, which does, to be fair, play into the fact that they're made from the same strain of virus that's actually a mold. The boss fights in this game though feel very diverse and different from each other. The level design is very cohesive with each area, and it's definitely loaded with puzzles for players to Sherlock Holmes their way through. The game is very creative and unique from other installments, featuring new mechanics such as videotapes helping guide you through certain parts of the game. The story of the game feels very refreshing as well, and it's an interesting take to see Umbrella being reformed as an anti-bioweapon agency, with Chris Redfield of all people working for them. The game definitely is filled with jump scares to keep your heart pounding throughout, so it's an easy purple herb for scariness. Level design is amazing in the game, with feeling engaging to explore and offering cohesive diversity to each area of the game. I can't say I love the ship or mine parts of the game due to the poor design of the ship and navigating it, along with just the mine being an annoying segment of the game with the amount of enemies there are. But overall, it's a blue herb for level design. For boss fights, the game had great character diversity and uniqueness in each encounter, so it's another easy purple herb for boss fights. The final title we're taking a look at is Resident Evil Village. It was released in 2021 with ports in 2022 and 2023. Now this title is arguably my favorite title next to Resident Evil 2. I always can't decide between the two which I like more because they're both equally as great in their own ways. But Village follows Ethan once again as he searches for his kidnapped daughter, Rose. This game gave me heavy Van Helsing vibes when playing it, and I loved it. It was very creative and original of Capcom to pay homage to Resident Evil 4 while wanting to do something unique. The enemies in this game have a great diversity between Lycans, Morikans, and Soldats. This game definitely takes a turn in vibe once you reach Heisenberg's area, going from gothic fantasy to dystopian cyberpunk. But most of the game keeps the vibe of gothic fantasy, and the switch to dystopian cyberpunk wasn't too jarring. It made sense for the antagonist of that section for his area to be themed as such. The game did a great job of giving diversity in its level designs for each section of the game. The story isn't the smoothest with its writing since there's some dialogue with the Duke and Mia and flashbacks that just come off as being overly dramatic for Ethan's character. Chris is in the game as well, but he's this unhelpful side character that just progressively pops up at different intervals. Eventually you get to play as Chris for a segment just before the final boss, and a member of his team flamed him for intentionally being mysterious and keeping Ethan out of the loop. The highlight for this game, I think, is Dimitrescu's castle and Beneviento's house. Both of these segments were great in their own ways. Castle Dimitrescu had great level design, and Lady Dimitrescu is just an occult antagonist for fans of the franchise. The design for Lady Dimitrescu was just a fantastic job by the developers because they really wanted to use Count Dracula lore to inspire every part of her. It's refreshing as well to get a character that's this towering and domineering woman in a game, since I can't say it's often we get a character design like her. Dimitrescu's daughters were heavily inspired by the brides of Dracula, and Dimitrescu's final form was a dragon since in translation, Count Dracula's real name translates to the dragon or something similar to that, which are some very awesome touch to details by the devs. Beneviento's house is great in the sense of really giving horror vibes. Capcom really wanted people to know they can do horror if they wanted to, because I was so uncomfortable playing this section of the game with the baby. There's an old video I did with my brother where I played this game on another channel, and I lost my shit with that part in the game. The puzzles in this section are just great as well. The twist with this game's story is crazy. Like seeing Evelyn again and finding out Ethan actually died in 7's prologue was mind-blowing. Now to wrap up this game, the game definitely gives you an unsettling feeling throughout with the Lycans because they really do get your heart pounding when you're surrounded by them. And Beneviento's house really made me uncomfortable throughout, so I'm giving it a blue herb for scariness. For level design, the game featured great level layouts throughout, and there were puzzles littered throughout these areas, so I'm giving it a purple herb for its level design. For bosses, the game definitely had a variety when it came to its bosses, and for the most part, they featured unique mechanics that made the fights more interesting, so I'm giving it a blue herb for its boss fights. Now with having discussed all the main entries in this franchise, it's time to decide the best and worst ones. It isn't just my feelings about these games I'm taking into consideration, but also the feelings of fans and critics with which titles are the best and worst. The worst title in the franchise I'd have to say is Resident Evil Revelations 2. Not only is this game just boring, but it's so unoriginal that if it's not repeating itself in ideas, like Alex Wesker, it's copying another popular game. Critics and players do enjoy this game, though no one's favorite in the franchise, but it's mainly because of the co-op experience. Enjoying the gameplay is something important when it comes to your experience with video games, but what makes video games good isn't only its gameplay, but its ability to immerse you in its world, have you connect with the characters, feel what the characters are feeling in the moment. Only way a game can accomplish that is having a unique, well-written story and characters, which this game feels severely lacking in originality compared to any other title in the franchise. The choice to have it be an episodic game I think just makes zero sense for why they wanted to go that direction, because it's not like any of the episodes came with amazing new content. Capcom wasn't tediously working to cook each episode with some really unique, crazy stuff for us. It's an incredibly disappointing title when compared to any other title in the franchise in all aspects, honestly. But moving on, now comes the best title in the franchise. Most titles have done really well with reception from fans and critics, and the franchise has definitely given us some great titles. But I think the best title the franchise has given us has to be, while not my personal favorite in the franchise, is Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. The reason I consider this to be the best title of the franchise has to do with a lot. For starters, this was the first title that truly made Resident Evil scary in the modern era of gaming where people are desensitized to horror. Capcom intentionally wanted to innovate the franchise by going first person to let everyone know Resident Evil is a horror game. The third person camera angle, while being a main staple of what people have enjoyed in the franchise, makes it harder for the franchise to be scary. First person camera angle makes the experience jarring for players and limits sensing danger looking around their peripherals. The only thing in the franchise that's been able to get my heart pounding pre-first person perspective is Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, which Capcom hasn't been able to recreate with their other third person games. RE7 was a big deal when it was announced, and the reception was overwhelmingly positive, with leaving players excited for future installments. DLC isn't something I've touched on in this video since I wasn't taking into consideration DLC content when it came to examining the titles, but with RE7 being crowned the best title in the franchise, it's worth discussing. Resident Evil 7 features some of the best DLC we've seen in the franchise. It gave diversity, lore building, and fun gameplay for players. Everyone loved the DLCs for this game. RE7 didn't just please longtime fans of the franchise, but its mass popularity also roped in tons of people new to the franchise. RE7's success, I think, was a big driving point and what made Resident Evil a mainstream topic since its launch. Resident Evil has always been a popular franchise, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't until RE7 where it began to feel like everyone was talking about the franchise, which hadn't happened in a long time. The remakes that have been coming out have been great for the most part and beloved by longtime fans, but RE7 I think made it really easy for Capcom to start making those remakes and to keep the franchise alive in popularity for gamers. But that's gonna do it for this video. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on my takes or what your favorite Resident Evil title is down in the comments, and don't forget to drop a like and hit subscribe to help support the channel. Till we meet again, stay freaky.